Alright, welcome to WILLSTAR Monsters and Mysteries. If this is your first time to the channel, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you see. I do things a little bit differently around here. I like to do some research and track down these locations and show them to you while I'm giving you the encounter using Google Earth. I just feel that brings another level of immersion for you guys into the video, and I know your guys' time is valuable, so I like to give you a lot of bang for the buck. What I have for you today is a couple encounters from right around 1900. One of them is from Tule Lake, California. A Modoc elder had a couple encounters with Sasquatches, personal encounters where they helped each other out. And the other encounter I have for you today is from the forest of Northern Maine. Yeah, you heard that right, Maine. This encounter happened in 1907. Now, the crazy thing about this encounter is the description of the creature and its behavior. So what I want you to do is I want you to leave me some comments below and let me know what you think this creature was that they're trying to describe. If you guys like the video, make sure you hit that like button for me. Really do appreciate it, and share it on your social media. That definitely helps. Alright, enough about that. Let's go ahead and get into these. The Klamath and Modoc tribes were generally divided into relatively autonomous villages in south central Oregon and northern California, each with its own leaders and shaman. The villages would ally for war, and members of different villages often married. They spoke related languages and shared many cultural traits. Their richly fertile territory lay in a great trough in the southern Cascade Range, some 100 miles long and 25 miles wide. During winter, when snowdrifts could reach 6 feet or more, most village families lived in semi-subterranean earth-covered lodges, usually one family to a lodge. In summer, the usual dwelling was either a domed house of poles and matting or a lean-to of brush. Sweat houses used by both men and women doubled as community centers for prayers and other religious activities. Religious belief focused largely on guardian spirits, whose aid was sought for all manner of human accomplishments. There was considerable trouble between the Modoc and the early white settlers. The Modoc were finally constrained to live in 1864 on the Klamath Reservation in Oregon, but most of the tribe was dissatisfied. In 1870, Chief Kinpwash, or Captain Jack, led a group back to California and refused to return to the reservation. The attempt to bring them back brought on the Modoc War, November of 1872 through June of 1873, which was more a 6-month winter siege than a war. The only Indian U.S. Army war ever fought in California had the Modoc hold up in lava rock caves, surrounded by U.S. troops throughout the winter months. General Canby was the only U.S. Army general ever killed in action, killed by Modoc. During all of the U.S. Indian Wars, General Custer was actually a lieutenant colonel. Captain Jack, the Modoc leader, was executed in October 1873. After the Modoc War, the Modoc people were divided. Some were sent to Oklahoma, where a few remain, and some to the Klamath Reservation in Oregon. The Modoc in Oregon shared lands with the Klamath and the Snake. The following story comes from the Many Smokes National American Indian Magazine, fall 1968. The Modoc Man and the Sasquatch, the Tule Lake Story. My grandfather was born in Upper California country near the mountain called Shasta. This was in the year of 1853. He fought in the Modoc Indian War in defense of his homeland. However, it was the same old story, defeat and being sent to a reservation. Grandfather did not like the white man's reservation, however, and soon returned to the part of the country that he loved. It was by some very good luck and with the help of a white friend in Eureka, California, he was able to buy some land near Tule Lake up in the mountains. He then built a cabin there and lived there from then on until his death. He died in 1939. He fell asleep on a riverbank and never awakened again. Grandfather lived a long and eventful life, but not always a happy one. He told me the story as a child, and I never tired of hearing it. His first contact with the Sasquatch was one evening in the summer of 1897. He was walking along a deer trail near a lake just about dusk, when he saw up ahead something that looked like a tall bush. Upon coming a little closer, he became aware of a strong odor, sort of musky. He then gave a close look at the bush and suddenly realized that it was not a bush at all, for it was covered from head to foot with thick, coarse hair, much like horsehair. He took a step closer, but the creature made a sound that sounded like "no." Grandfather knew this was the man of the mountain the old one spoke about, a Sasquatch. Although it was growing darker, Grandfather was able to see quite clearly 2 soft brown eyes through the hairy head part. Then the creature moved slightly, and grandfather made a motion of friendship and laid down the string of fish that he had been carrying. The creature evidently understood this, and as it quickly snatched up the fish and struck out through the timber nearby, it stopped only for a moment and made a sound that my grandfather never forgot. Grandfather never told anyone outside the family the story. He called them people. He referred to them as people called MokkaMusic. It was only a few weeks after his encounter with the MokkaMusic that he was awakened one morning by some strange noises outside his cabin. Upon investigating, he found a stack of deerskins, fresh and ready for tanning. Off in the distance, he heard that strange sound once again. After this, there were other items left from time to time, such as wood for fuel, acorn, wild berries, and fruits. It was a few years later that grandfather had his second, but far more amazing contact with the Sasquatch. Grandfather had taken a job with some white men from the San Francisco area to help them search for some gold that was supposed to be on Mount Shasta in California. Now, grandfather never cared much for money, but times had changed for the Indian and living off the land was a little harder now. However, these men had a map of some kind and were bound that they would find the gold in question. So grandfather agreed to act as a guide for them. However, he could scarcely conceal the fact that he thought all whites a little crazy that searched for this yellow metal. Even though they assured grandfather that if they found the gold he would be a rich man, this made little or no difference to him. After the treasure party had reached the foot of Mount Shasta, the whites began drinking a lot. So grandfather told them that he would go ahead and explore some of the lower level rock shelves, as they were in no condition to do so themselves. Soon that morning he set out up a mountain trail, and after quite a bit of a rough climbing he reached a shelf that he wished to examine. Then it happened. A timber rattler struck him in the leg. Grandfather killed the snake and started to come back to a more comfortable spot, but soon found it difficult to go on walking. And as best as he can remember, he became sick to his stomach and fainted. When he came around again, he thought he was dreaming, for 3 large MokkaMusic, about 8 to 10 feet tall, surrounded him. He noted that they had made a small cut and somehow removed some of the venom, and they placed cool moss on the bite. Then one of the MokkaMusic made a grunting sound, and the two lifted him up and took him down a trail that he did not know. Finally, after some little descent down the mountainside, they placed him under a low brushy tree and left. Again, grandfather heard their mournful cry. After a long while, he began to feel better, and then took his old .44 caliber cap and ball pistol and began to fire some shots in the air. Finally, the gold party found him. Grandfather said nothing about what had happened concerning the MokkaMusic. He was taken to where the pack mules were tied, and then on to the nearest little town where he rested for a few days, and then returned to Tule Lake. Grandfather told only his immediate family about his encounter, and after this would never take anyone for any amount of money to the Mount Shasta region. He would only say, "MokkaMusic live, that holy place, I have friends there." For many years after, in the still of the evening or sometimes late at night, he would still hear the sound he now knew. The call of the MokkaMusic. Grandfather went on to relate that the MokkaMusic were not vicious, but were very shy, especially of the white man, and they generally only came out in the evenings and at night. They lived chiefly on roots they dug and berries, and only ate meat in the bitterest of cold weather. Their homes are in the deep mountainside burrows unknown to man. I never tired of these stories my grandfather told me as a boy, and he said they were true, and I believed him. May his spirit always know peace. Can a myth come into existence spontaneously? At the close of a 5 years residence among hunters, lumbermen, and river drivers of the Northern Maine forest in connection with the lumbering business of my uncle's firm, I find myself puzzling at those questions, as I recall the persistent and ever-recurring tales and accounts which everywhere come to my ears of that strange being or animal which the Indians used to call Pomoola, and which the white woodsmen have translated to the Indian devil. As nearly as can be gathered from the legends of the Indians of Maine, Pomoola was a beast, a man, and a devil, in a whimsical trinity, a savage relative of the old Greek Cerberus perhaps, possessing certain supernatural and fiendish powers, and thus capable of doing infinite mischief if offended. With this fanciful character, The Indians seem to have invested something they did actually see and meet occasionally in those regions. Katahdin and the neighboring mountains was a locality especially infested by it. Indeed, the summit of Katahdin has been sacred to Pomoola from earliest times. No Indian in his senses would venture to ascend it. The Squatic Lake region was another of his haunts. Numberless are the stories of the strange tricks and antics of the curious devil of the woods and lakes. I have heard woodsmen, plain sensible bodies, who were neither long-sighted nor bicycles, who were clothed in their right minds, undoubtedly tell the story straightforward and honest enough to silence the most skeptical, not of what they have heard either, but of what they had actually seen. It would seem well nigh impossible that these accounts should originate in nothing. If verbal testimony could substantiate them, enough could be collected to establish in law the existence of a whole legion of Pomoolas. Now, setting all superstition aside, will not the array of testimony warrant the following question? May there not have existed, and perhaps be at present existing, in the great forest region to the northward, some creature, wild man, or something of the sort not down in the books, which has been the kernel of the Indian devil? I have my own little story to tell, for I did see something rather weird one day, and right here seems to be a place for it. After remarking that some had thought that the Indian devil was merely the catamount, this is entirely a mistake, arising perhaps from the well-known dread the Indians had for the cougar. During the winter of '07, the headquarters and general depot of our lumbering gangs was at the head of the Sasquatch Lake, a long narrowish lake to the northwest of the Katahdin. The logs went down this lake with the spring thaw into the west branch of the Penobscot, and during the frozen season it offered an easy open thoroughfare up into the forest. From this point, the various camps within a radius of 20 to 25 miles took their provisions. One of the most distant of these had been established at the head of the Cowcomgomac, a smaller lake some 20 miles to the northward. And during the month of February, a Rowan camp, from the boss being so incompetent, had made it necessary to pay off and discharge a part of the hands, and I was sent out from Bangor for that purpose, having for an escort and a guide, because I was only 17 at the time, an old hunter named Huey Clives. The trip up to the head of the Sasquatch occupied a week, and after resting a day at the supply camp, we started on for the camp at the Cowcomgomac. The trail ran through an almost unbroken wilderness, and the snow lay from 4 to 5 feet deep, but on our snowshoes we didn't mind the depth. The main thing was to keep out of the brush, and hence it seemed a great relief to come out just as the sun was setting upon the foot of the Cowcomgomac, stretching away in a broad frozen plain 10 miles to the northward. As the camp was no more than a mile in from the head, Clives had anticipated getting up there early in the evening. To him the distance was as nothing, but to me it now seemed infinite. It was my first whole day on snowshoes, and my legs had not taken kindly to the length and novelty of the performance. And despite all my attempts to disguise the fact, I knew that Clive saw that I was about used up. "Think you can hold out, youngster?" said the old fellow, looking around to me with a hard grin. "How's your wind? Think you can straddle the lake, or will you have to dig a hole in the snow here and burrow like a rabbit? Nice chance there under those little hemlocks." We struck out upon the lake, and had soon left its black spruce-lined shore a mile to the rear. Meanwhile the twilight had deepened, the sky was clear, and in the west deep red, and that startling phenomenon peculiar to frozen waters, and said to indicate a storm. The moaning and groaning of the air beneath the ice began with frightful distinctness. Never had I heard such a sound before. It seemed as if 1,000 demons in agony were gurgling and drowning beneath us. Now a wild sigh would struggle up from the depths and echo to a distant moan, when again a deep, fearful groan would sweep along, making the thick ice shiver and vibrate like a drumhead. But Clives only laughed at my apprehensions that the lake must be breaking up, and was saying that this was a common enough thing to hear on these waters, when a short, gruff bark from Vet, Huey's hound, caused us to look suddenly around. Some 30 or 40 rods from the rear, and barely distinguishable in the rapid falling dusk, a dark object was coming on behind us. We both took it for a man with the first glance. "Strange, though," muttered Clives, hastily examining the cap on his rifles. "Must have come up pretty quick, too. Looked around not 5 minutes ago and saw nothing then." Strange indeed, unpromising too. I had quite a large sum of currency about me for the payment of the gang. The circumstance of being followed in the dark was not pleasant. But then we were 2 to his 1. Someone out like ourselves, perhaps. Somebody out hunting, I suppose, said I. Possible, said Clives, walking on, with one eye turned back over his shoulder. Barely possible. Don't often fall in with a man so, in here though. At any rate, he means to come up with us, said I, for although we were now walking quite rapidly, the distance between us was visibly lessening. That's plain enough, replied Huey, and to the truth, youngster, looking uneasily at me, on your account, I should like to know what's wanted before he comes much nearer. You'll have to find out in a hurry then, said I, with another glance behind. He's coming up at a great rate, surely. Hello! Hello there! Shouted Huey, cracking his rifle. The stranger was now no more than 100 yards distant. But for his reply, he raised his arms and brandished them wildly about his head. Who are you? What do you want? Shouted Clives again, and again those wild gesticulations. Well, by Jehu, explained the old man. What signs and motions? Must be a dumb man. Stopped though, hasn't he? Why in the world don't he answer? Perhaps he did, said I. The ice makes such a noise we may not have heard him. Perhaps, but he don't act right, and I've a mind to let a ball fly after him. Set Vet on him, suggested I. Here, Vet, my boy, go for him. But Vet, a fine daredevil of a hound, only winced and stuck the closer, almost tripping us up in his efforts to keep near. It grew darker momentarily, and as nothing could be got out of the stranger at this distance save those inexplicable gestures, and since, to tell the truth, we didn't care about going back to cultivate his acquaintance, we at length started on again. Can't make him out at all, muttered Clives. Shouldn't be surprised to hear a ball go by any minute, but I don't quite like to fire first. Perhaps he'll go back now that he finds we got our eye on him. And for a while we fancied he had gone back, but a moment later discerned him flitting along after us, sometimes coming up within 50 yards, then halting till invisible in the darkness. Several miles were thus passed over. What with the sighting and gurgling under the ice, and that mysterious object flitting along behind us, the situation was a rather singular one to say the least. Presently the moon began to shine up over the forest-clad mountains to the eastward, and a little broad bright disk peered up over the distant ridge. Things were thus revealed in a much clearer light. In the darkness, our pursuer had at times assumed gigantic proportion. It now seemed that the figure was of a medium-sized man. But he's bareheaded, said I, as this fact became apparent in the moonlight. No gun either, said Huey, and that must be a mighty snug-fitting suit of clothes he's got on. Hello! Hello there! You man in tights! What's wanted? Thus called to, the creature object halted, gestured as before, then dropped on all fours, ran off to the left of us, coursing along with amazing swiftness, and describing a broad semicircle, came around to a point directly in front of us, some 50 rods ahead. We stood still in amazement. Arriving at this point, the creature began to dig in the snow, throwing it up in silvery wreaths, and in a few minutes had buried itself from our view, saving a black crest peeping up over the edge of the drift. Good heavens, I at length said, what running? That was never a man. No, that was never a man, repeated Huey. But what is it? Cried I. What can it be? You saw it run, said Huey interrogatively. Saw it run? I guess I saw it run. I never saw anything run like it. It must have been a spook. And you saw it beckon and make signs, continued Huey reflectively. Of course I did, a dozen times. What in the world are you driving at? Well, youngster, the old man went on, that's an Indian devil. That is the third one I've seen, or the third time I've seen it, for maybe it's the same one. The last time was 8 years ago down on Junior Lake. I might have known what this was at first, but I didn't think till I saw it run. But what's to be done, said I. Going to fire at it? Fire at it? No, not for the world. Then won't it meddle with us? Not if we let it alone and go on our business. But we must go around it then. Isn't that being a little cowardly? Clive said, young man, you don't know what you're talking about. In short, Clives would hear to nothing like offensive operations against the creature, devil, or whatever it was. The old fellow was pretty stoutly tinged with superstitions of the region in which his life had passed. There was no help for it. Turning aside, we made a wide detour around the hole in which the creature was crouching, quite similar to the one it had made to get in front of us, and then walked quickly on again. But our tricksy pursuer was not yet done with us. Before we had gotten a quarter of a mile away, we again beheld him careering around us as before, and again concealing himself in the snow. To be playing such a game of bo-peep on a wintry lake after being on my feet all day was anything but amusing to me. And not having the fear of Pomoola sufficiently before my eyes, perhaps, I should certainly have risked a shot at him. Indeed, I'm of the opinion that a well-directed rifle ball would not only have cleared up the Indian devil mystery then and there, but would have added a new and important specimen to some zoological collection. It was undoubtedly a beast, wild man, or something like that. The track for a diddly tracks was that of a large, longish foot, pressed down deeply into the snow. But to have fired at it would have been doing violence to Huey's prejudices. We again made our manners to the devil by shearing around his hole, and repeated the same program twice more before reaching the head of the lake. After entering the woods again, we caught several glimpses of it dodging among the trees, but lost sight of it for good about a half a mile below the camp, and thus ended my adventure with an Indian devil. I know I did see something unknown, and I respectfully add this to a legion of very similar stories which one may hear any evening at a logging camp.